Good evening once again. This is woodblock printmaker Dave Bull with the next episode in our ongoing epic journey to create a new reproduction of the Hokusai Great Wave print. The past few videos have been all over the map, talking about any number of different topics. So tonight I'm going to try and corral the cats, tie up a bunch of the loose ends I left hanging, and get back on track with the actual production of the print process. A few weeks ago, back in video, I think it was number 8, I showed these two images. One of a print in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the other from the British Museum in London. For those who haven't seen that video, I can quickly recap. The two prints seemed at the initial investigation to be printed from the same block set, but under strong magnification, many important differences in the carving became apparent. But as many of the mistakes in the carving were also duplicated, the suspicion was that one of these was perhaps made as a knockoff of the other, with perhaps the intent of making people think that it was older than it really was. Now, given that they're printed from different blocks, the obvious question that soon arises is which of the two might be the original and which might be the knockoff? Can we tell? Well, as I said at that time, I cannot categorically state that either one of these is an original. They may be something older than both of these, but I do have a very strong suspect for the position of knockoff. Get your glasses on, we're going to need them, and take a look at some of these enlargements. This is over in the leftmost boat. It's part of the straw matting that hangs over the side of the craft. All the small dots and dashes making up the shape of the matting are, of course, originally drawn with the brush, then carved. They all show their origin in the brush with tapered shapes. You can see the motion of the original brushstroke. Except this one. No taper, no brushstroke. It's a lozenge-shaped blot with sharp corners. It doesn't belong here. Where did it come from? Well, look at this. The same place over on the other copy. Now we can see that it's not a straight-sided lozenge shape, but is actually two perfectly normal brushstrokes. Just what one might expect to see. I think it's pretty clear what has happened here. The one with the two brushstrokes is the normal way that this spot would be carved. But the carver who made the other one, the knockoff, didn't quite catch the two strokes there when he made his tracing, and ended up with a formless blot that shows no origin in the brush. Perhaps the copy that he traced had a bit of tamari, extra paste stuck in there, or perhaps he just didn't notice. I, of course, can't tell. But there is no way at all that this could have happened the other way around. A formless blot on an original being separated into two nice brushstrokes on a knockoff. The one with the two brushstrokes is the British Museum version. The Met copy with the lozenge must be, I believe, a later reproduction. When was it made and by whom? One guess is as good as another. As we saw in the course of our investigations, it's a very high quality carving, and all I can say is that it will be a late Edo or perhaps early Meiji reproduction. A polite interpretation is that it could possibly have been made by the original publisher to replace the first block that was wearing out. But a more likely analysis, because mistakes were also reproduced, is that it was intentionally made as a knockoff to capitalize on the huge demand for original copies of this design. So there we have it. In a comparison of this particular pair, the British Museum is the winner. But that's not the end of the story. There will never be an end to this. Let's dig a bit further. The British Museum website says that they own 5 copies of this image, and on their website they have downloadable versions of 3 of them. Here they are. Now, don't panic, we're not going to start this whole thing all over again, but I can't resist giving a very quick rundown, and I bet you can guess exactly what the result will be. It's the same script. First, when you look at places that show similarities, even, for example, this totally worn out and broken places on the cartouche box, they match perfectly. Surely these must be the same block set. Actually, no. Let's look at another area of those same two prints. Very badly printed, but even so, anybody can see they still show totally different carving. It turns out that all 3 of these British Museum prints, as well as the Met copy, were all printed from different block sets. I tell you, there was such a massive business in making knockoffs back in the Meiji period that no museum anywhere in the world need be embarrassed by having prints like this in their collection. I suspect there is really no way at this point to identify just which among all these many variations might be the earliest one. That might be actually a hugely interesting research project for somebody. gather together really good high-res images, so as many copies of this print as you can find from museums and private collections around the world, and then start to sort through them, trying to find matching copies, trying to identify which ones might have preceded others. I myself don't possibly have the time or resources for such a project, but it would be a ton of fun. Okay, let's move on and get back to my own work. Now, I know what a number of you have watched the original videos in this series might be asking at this point. The image I used as the master copy for my tracing work was the Metropolitan print. Now that I have, to my own satisfaction, identified this one as a knockoff, does that mean that I have to start my work all over again? The answer to that is a clear no, and here's why. Even though I traced this print extremely closely, at sometimes over 400% enlargement, when it comes to the actual carving on the block, there is no enlargement to make things easy. I have to work in the real world. And honestly speaking, as good as I am, my skills do not reach the same level as those carvers of 150 odd years ago. Those carvers were just carvers. They began at a very young age, worked under very strict masters, and did nothing every day but carve. I print as well. I run a business. I waste my time making YouTube videos. There's no end to it all. I have tried to keep as close as I could to that tracing, but there will perhaps be more variation in my own work than there was between the two copies that we examined. So it doesn't really matter which one of these very close copies I used as my guide, because my own version will show my own hand. Perhaps if I was doing this 10 or 15 years back, when a couple of things were different, I could have got closer. One was that my eyes were, of course, in much better shape. I'm 63 now, and it sometimes seems to me that my sight is getting worse day by day by day. But a bigger factor is the amount of concentration and focus to bring to the work. 10 years ago, I was a solo guy, sitting quiet in my workroom, totally focused on those jobs at hand. When I now look back at some of the stuff that I made then, I can hardly believe it. Did I actually carve these things? This is a print from one of the Surimono albums I made around 15 years ago. It's perhaps the most delicate calligraphy carving I've ever done. This also is done on a piece of inlaid boxwood. There's just no way that cherry wood will hold lines this fine. The coin there is a Japanese 10 yen, about the size of a US quarter. And this one is from my Mystique series a few years back, also on boxwood. The carving of the hair is pretty insane. I'm very lucky in this respect, in that, unlike all the other carvers here who work for hire, I choose my own work and can thus stretch myself like this. Anyway, enough of that. Here's our Great Wave keyblock, now within actually just a few minutes of being finished. From what I can tell so far, until I proof it, I think it has actually come out pretty well. It was a very nice hard piece of wood, but actually it wasn't perfect. And have a look up here in this corner where the cartouche with the lettering is carved. Do you notice the different color? I found the cherry wood at that point not quite strong enough for the very small complex kanji characters, so I decided to inlay a piece of boxwood at that point. I took a few photos while doing it. Maybe you'd like to see them here. The first step in doing an inlay like this is preparing the hole to receive the piece. I use a router with a straight bit, which gives me a nice flat-bottomed hole with gently rounded corners. The hole is just a sliver shallower than the piece of wood that will be inlaid, and the two deeper parts you see are holes to receive glue squeeze out. Once the hole is ready, I cut a piece of boxwood to the right dimensions, round the corners, and then slightly bevel the edges on sandpaper so that it will squeeze into the space. Dabs of glue all around, and then gently down into the hole it goes. I clamp it very tightly until the glue is well set, and then use a cabinet scraper blade to shave it down to the proper level. At this point, you can no longer feel where the cherry wood ends and the boxwood begins. Here you can see the tracing taped to the wood and then folded back ready for the glue. It's now glued down, and the final step is to rub off the back layers of the paper with a moistened finger. Ready to carve. So, as I said, this is now nearly done. The next step will be to wash off the leftover tracings of the hanshita, then pull a couple of proof sheets. At that point, I take it back to the bench to make whatever adjustments seem necessary, trimming here and there places that might have been carved a bit too roughly. I'll then move ahead to the stage of making color transfer sheets, and that's the procedure that will make up the content of most of the next video episode. There's one more thing to mention before heading outside to end this video. Now that we are getting closer to the printing stage, it's probably time to let people know about how they might get a copy of this print once we're done. As you all know, the initial 200 copies or so are going out to Kickstarter backers. But once the blocks have had a chance to settle down and dry out from that edition of printing, we will of course be making more. I've now put up a couple of web pages that explain what we will be doing and how people will be able to get the print. And there's a form there where you can leave your name and email if you would like me to contact you when we are ready to begin regular production. I'll leave the URL in the description accompanying this video. And now it is time to head outside. But what you're about to see isn't video that I took earlier today, but footage I took about a week ago. This year's sakura season turned out to be a very short one, with strong winds and rain putting an end to most of it just a few days after they blossomed. But I did get the camera outside to get some footage, all taken as usual within just a couple of minutes of our shop here. Thank you again for all the wonderful comments on these videos and for the support of our work. I'll see you in the next episode quite soon. Good night. Those previous couple of shots were over by Sensoji Temple, and this one is over at the Sumida River. Actually, I have bad news to report. To all these people who were preparing parties over here at this time were rained out this very night. It really was a bad season this year. I suppose right about now you're wondering what's going on in the background. Is somebody taking a chainsaw to these cherry trees? No, it's a bit more mundane than that. You'll see.